Right now, something very big has quietly changed in the way the United States sees the world. And most people haven't fully understood it yet. Because this isn't just another government report. This is a signal, a warning. And for some countries, it may feel like the ground is suddenly shifting under their feet. For decades, the United States played a very clear role on the global stage. It acted like the ultimate security provider, the country that would step in, protect allies, confront enemies, and carry the biggest military burden almost everywhere on Earth. Friends relied on it, rivals feared it, and the entire world order was built around that assumption. But now, according to the Pentagon's newly released National Defense Strategy, that era is changing. Not loudly, not with a dramatic announcement, but clearly enough that anyone paying attention can feel the difference. The message from Washington is simple and also unsettling. America's first priority is no longer the world. It is itself, the homeland, the Western Hemisphere. And beyond that, support for allies will continue, but it will be more limited, more conditional, and much less automatic than before. At first glance, this may sound like a technical policy shift, just another document, another strategy, another set of words. But when you listen closely, when you read between the lines, you realize this is a fundamental rethink of America's role in global security. For years, China was officially named as the biggest threat to U.S. security. That language dominated Pentagon documents. It shaped military spending, alliances, and diplomacy. But in this new strategy, China is no longer described as the central enemy. The tone is softer. The approach is different. The focus has moved. Instead, the Pentagon now says the most important mission is protecting the U.S. homeland and its immediate surroundings. The Western Hemisphere is back at the center of American military thinking. Not Europe, not the Middle East, not even Asia in the way it once was. This is not happening in isolation. This strategy follows last year's national security strategy, which shocked many U.S. allies by suggesting that Europe was facing something close to civilizational collapse, and by refusing to describe Russia as a direct threat to the United States itself. At the time, Moscow reacted calmly, even approvingly. Russian officials said the document largely aligned with their own worldview. That alone raised eyebrows across NATO capitals. Now, this new Pentagon strategy goes even further. Russia is described as a persistent but manageable threat, mainly affecting NATO's eastern members. Not a global danger, not an existential enemy. Manageable. For countries like Poland, the Baltic states, and others living close to Russia's borders, those words matter, because language in Washington often becomes reality on the ground. Then there is Taiwan. For years, Taiwan appeared prominently in U.S. defense planning as a critical flashpoint, a symbol of U.S. commitment to countering China's rise. But in this new strategy, Taiwan is not mentioned at all. Not once. This silence is striking, especially considering that just months ago, the U.S. approved an $11 billion arms sale to Taiwan, triggering massive Chinese military drills around the island. The tension has not disappeared. The risk has not gone away. But the words have. Instead of naming Taiwan, the document uses broader language, saying the U.S. will prevent any country, including China, from dominating America or its allies. It's vague, it's open-ended, and it leaves room for interpretation. And that uncertainty is exactly what makes allies nervous. The strategy makes another point very clear. American allies, especially in Europe, are being told to do more, much more. The Pentagon openly says that many partners have been content to let Washington subsidize their defense for years. Those days, according to this document, are ending. The United States says it does not want to confuse American interests with the interests of the rest of the world. A threat to someone far away, the report argues, is not automatically a threat to an American citizen. So from now on, allies will be expected to take the lead against dangers that affect them more directly. The U.S. may still help, but the help will be limited, strategic, conditional. The Pentagon insists this does not mean isolationism. It says America is not withdrawing from the world. Instead, it describes this shift as hard-nosed realism, a rejection of what it calls utopian idealism from the post-Cold War era. In simple words, the message is this: America will choose its battles more carefully, and it will no longer carry the world on its shoulders by default. This thinking fits perfectly with President Donald Trump's worldview. Since beginning his second term, Trump has repeatedly criticized alliances like NATO. He has claimed, incorrectly, that the United States pays almost all of NATO's costs and gets nothing in return. At the World Economic Forum in Davos, Trump openly questioned the value of NATO, saying America never asked for anything and never received anything. Those remarks sent shockwaves through European leaders. Because for Europe, NATO is not just a military alliance. It is the backbone of their security system. And any hint that the US might reduce its commitment forces them to confront uncomfortable questions. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney put it bluntly. He said the old world order is not coming back, and he warned that middle powers must work together. Because if they are not at the table, they are on the menu. French President Emmanuel Macron echoed a similar fear, warning that the world may be moving toward a future without clear rules. And while these leaders were speaking, the Pentagon strategy quietly reinforced another major shift. Latin America is now at the top of America's security agenda. The document talks about restoring American military dominance in the Western Hemisphere. It promises to guarantee U.S. military and commercial access to key locations like the Panama Canal, the Gulf of America, and Greenland. Yes, Greenland. Over the past year, the U.S. has applied intense pressure on allies over Greenland. It has seized Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro in a dramatic operation. It has carried out deadly strikes on alleged drug smuggling boats in the Caribbean and Eastern Pacific. More than 100 people have been killed in those strikes. And human rights groups say there is no clear evidence that the vessels posed an immediate threat or were even involved in drug trafficking. International law experts have raised serious concerns, suggesting these actions may amount to extrajudicial killings. But in the new strategy, these actions are framed as necessary steps to protect the homeland. Border security is described as national security. Illegal immigration and narcotics trafficking are treated as military threats. This document even criticizes the previous administration, accusing it of neglecting the border and allowing what it calls a flood of illegal aliens. Notably absent from the strategy is any mention of climate change. Under the previous administration, climate change was labeled an emerging national security threat. Now, it has gone from the document entirely. What replaces it is a laser focus on territory, access, and control, on hard power, on geography. This approach is described as the Trump corollary to the Monroe Doctrine, a modern version of the 200-year-old idea that the Western Hemisphere should be off limits to rival powers. The language is blunt. The tone is unapologetic. Out with utopian idealism, in with hard-nosed realism. For U.S. allies, this raises a painful question. If America is pulling back, even partially, who fills the gap? Europe is already struggling to increase defense spending. Many countries face political opposition at home. Others lack industrial capacity, and time is not on their side. In Asia, allies like South Korea are being told they are capable of taking primary responsibility for deterring North Korea. Again, the message is clear. The U.S. will support, but it will not lead in the same way. This strategy does not mean America is weak. Far from it. It means America is choosing to concentrate its power closer to home. But concentration always comes with trade-offs. When the world's most powerful military narrows its focus, uncertainty grows elsewhere. Rivals test boundaries. Allies hedge their bets. And smaller countries feel exposed. Some analysts see this as the beginning of a multipolar security world where no single country guarantees stability. Others warn it could invite miscalculation, especially in regions already on edge. What happens next depends on how this strategy is implemented. Words on paper matter, but actions matter more. Will the U.S. truly limit its support when crises erupt? Will allies rise to the challenge? Or will cracks appear in alliances that once seemed unbreakable? One thing is certain. This document marks the end of an era. The era where America saw every global threat as its own. The world is entering a phase where power is more fragmented, responsibility is more localized, and guarantees are no longer absolute. And whether this leads to greater stability or deeper chaos is a question no strategy document can fully answer. Because history is not shaped by words alone. It is shaped by what happens when those words are tested. And that test may come sooner than anyone expects. But the story does not end here. Because when a superpower changes its posture, the shockwaves don't stay on paper. They travel, quietly at first, then all at once. Across Europe, defense ministries began rereading the document line by line, not for what it promised, but for what it no longer guaranteed. Behind closed doors, officials asked questions they had avoided for years. What if American air power is delayed? What if intelligence sharing slows? What if the phone doesn't get answered as quickly as before? These are not theoretical fears. Europe's security architecture was built on the assumption of rapid American response. Remove even part of that assumption, and the entire structure feels less solid. Germany, the largest economy in Europe, still struggles to meet defense spending targets. Years of underinvestment cannot be reversed overnight. France has ambition but limited reach. Eastern European states have urgency, but not enough resources. And Russia is watching all of this very closely. For Moscow, being labeled a persistent but manageable threat is not an insult. It is an opportunity. It suggests patience may be rewarded. That time, pressure, and political division inside NATO could slowly weaken collective resolve. Russia does not need to win a war outright. It only needs to create doubt. In Asia, the silence on Taiwan has created a different kind of tension. Taiwanese officials publicly downplay the omission, insisting that U.S. support remains strong. Privately, the concern is obvious, because in geopolitics, what is not said can matter more than what is. China, meanwhile, reads the strategy with careful calculation. The softer tone, the emphasis on respectful relations, the lack of direct confrontation language. None of this is accidental. Beijing understands that the U.S. is not stepping away from Asia, but it also sees an America that wants to avoid being stretched too thin, an America that wants stability without escalation. That creates space. Space for pressure campaigns, space for gray zone tactics, space for moves that stay just below the threshold of open conflict. The arms sale to Taiwan shows the U.S. is still willing to act, but the strategy suggests it wants to act quietly, selectively, and without committing itself to unlimited risk. In South Korea, the message is clearer and more uncomfortable. The Pentagon says Seoul is capable of taking primary responsibility for deterring North Korea. That statement carries weight. North Korea is unpredictable, nuclear-armed, isolated, and prone to sudden escalation. Asking South Korea to take the lead does not remove the U.S. from the equation, but it does change the balance. It also raises domestic debates inside South Korea about military spending, nuclear options, and long-term security planning. Meanwhile, in Latin America, the consequences are already visible. The capture of Nicolas Maduro sent a shock through the region. Supporters saw it as a long overdue strike against authoritarianism. Critics called it a dangerous precedent. Either way, it confirmed one thing. The U.S. is willing to use direct force in its own hemisphere without waiting for international approval. The strikes on alleged drug smuggling boats go even further. More than 100 lives lost, limited transparency, and serious legal questions. For Washington, these actions are framed as defense. For many in the region, they feel like dominance. This is the paradox of the new strategy. America says it is stepping back globally, yet acting more forcefully closer to home. Less everywhere, more nearby. The emphasis on controlling key terrain like the Panama Canal and Greenland reinforces this mindset. These are not symbolic locations. They are choke points, economic arteries, strategic leverage. In a world where supply chains are fragile and competition is intense, control matters. Critics argue that this focus risks alienating allies while emboldening rivals. Supporters say it is long overdue realism. They argue that the U.S. spent decades bleeding resources, lives, and attention across distant conflicts, while neglecting its own borders and strategic backyard. This strategy, they say, finally puts American interests first. But interests are not static, and today's clarity can become tomorrow's blind spot. The absence of climate change from the document is a clear example. Climate-driven disasters already strain militaries, destabilize regions, and trigger mass migration. Ignoring it does not make it disappear. Yet the strategy chooses to focus on tangible threats: borders, ships, territory, forces. This choice reflects a worldview where power is physical, visible, and enforceable. And that worldview is reshaping alliances. Countries that once relied heavily on Washington are now exploring alternatives: regional partnerships, defense integration, strategic autonomy. Canada talks about middle powers acting together. Australia strengthens ties in the Indo-Pacific. Europe debates a future where it must stand more on its own. These shifts take years, not months. But the direction is set. The United States is no longer promising to be everywhere, for everyone, at all times. Instead, it is drawing circles, clearer priorities, firmer boundaries. For some, this feels like abandonment. For others, like honesty. History will judge whether this strategy prevents conflict or invites it. Because when guarantees become conditional, every actor recalculates. And recalculation is when mistakes happen. The world is entering a phase where power must be earned locally, not borrowed globally. Where alliances require contribution, not assumption. And where the absence of certainty may become the most destabilizing force of all. This is not the collapse of American power. It is its repositioning. And the consequences of that move will unfold not in reports, but in real crises, real decisions, and real lives. The question is no longer whether the world has changed. The question is whether the world is ready for what comes next.